Okay, if you've watched some of my other videos, you'll know that I'm not exactly the biggest fan of CGI. But considering I've already dedicated an entire video to that, which you can find a link in the description to in case you're curious, today I'd like to demonstrate how practical effects can sometimes be better than CGI, specifically by comparing a few scenes that are similar in nature where the two are used. Now, these clips I will be using might be a bit spoiler heavy in nature, so please just be on the lookout for that in case there's anything you're trying to avoid. Now, as most of you probably already know, before there was CGI to make everything so easy for filmmakers in a movie to achieve, ranging from the impossible to the mundane, practical effects were used in order to make harder shots and conceptions possible. And this ranged from makeup to stop motion, puppets, miniatures, and sometimes even traditional animation. Now, obviously, they're a lot harder to make and more time consuming to use, but many have started coming more and more to their defense in recent years, arguing that they do have certain advantages over computer generated imagery. And with that being said, I most definitely agree with them on that. Now, as I've already said, I've made it no secret that I am not the biggest fan of CGI. But instead of me once again explaining why that is, let's just get into the first clips I want to compare so I can show you a major reason why I feel that way. And those clips pertain to the destruction of Alderaan in Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, and the destruction of the Hosnian system in Star Wars Episode 7 The Force Awakens. Now, obviously, both scenes center around planets that are blown up by a planet killer, but the difference is that one is a model that was actually blown up for the scene, and the other was destroyed using nothing but CGI. And with that being said, I think now is a good time to play both clips. Did you notice any obvious differences? If you didn't, I'll point them out to you. When Alderaan explodes, a second explosion goes off on the back of the planet a few seconds after the initial one does. And that wasn't planned or scripted. That was really just some charges going off a few seconds later than they were supposed to. And the other difference is that the flames coming out of Alderaan are a lot brighter and far reaching than the ones created by the Hosnian system's destruction. Now, you're probably wondering, what's my point with all of this? That practical effects have an element of reality to them that CGI can never have, which is the unexpected element. Everything done with CGI is always completely deliberate except for the occasional animation error, and the result is that it can look rather fake when compared to the real thing. Because the thing is, we don't know what a planet being blown up by a giant laser would actually look like, and hopefully we never will. But the larger flames and erratic second explosion seem a lot more realistic and true to life than the entire surface of the planet being fried as the laser pierces through and turns the whole thing into a fireball from the inside out. You see what I'm saying? The fact that they were controlling every aspect of the explosion caused them to put in way too much detail and have the flames look rather low key and dark, all things considered. But this looks a lot more like a planet exploding because it's an actual explosion. And the fact that it doesn't just turn into a fireball, but has a random second explosion and flames of bright orange dispersing wildly in every direction, with some being far more reaching than others, feels a lot more authentic. Because when its animator is just trying to duplicate something, it always looks smooth and polished over, which isn't how a real explosion looks. It's random, erratic, and above all, really bright. But for another comparison, let's take a scene from the end of the Terminator movie and from Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines. Now, I know many have complained that the robot at the end of the first movie looks fake, but the thing is, I find him terrifying, and I always have. And that part of the reason for that is because it's really there and moving around, and not just something that you know is created with a computer and therefore doesn't actually exist. Especially that scene of it holding the door as the music blares. I don't care what anybody says. That might just be the scariest moment in the entire movie. But that's not actually what I want to talk about here. No. The two shots I want to compare is when the robot reaches in through the hole it made in the door in the first one, and the half robot reaching for his hydrogen chip in the third. So with that being said, here are the two clips. Now I know this one's a bit harder to see, but there was still a small but very important difference there. In the first clip, the way the robot sticks its arm in to grab the pole shows the realistic limitations of what an arm made of steel would have. It's having trouble sticking it through and grabbing onto it because a metal arm would be more restrained and immobile than a human one. And this goes for its fingers as well. When it grabs the pole, it just clutches it. There's no subtle finger movements, just opening and closing. And given the way the fingers look, it's only natural that they'd have almost no ability to move side to side like a person is able to. Now, in contrast, in this scene, it is so obvious that that's just Arnold Schwarzenegger's arm digitally made to look like a robot's. Because here, the wrist and hand are moving in positions that they should not be able to. And the fingers are moving way too freely for how restrictive in movement they look. Now, maybe one could argue that it would look better in this case if he had done a better job of imitating a robot's more limited range of movement. But when you're doing it this way, subtle human movements are always going to slip through, no matter how hard they try. Like, take this shot in Avengers Endgame. It's rather clear that Josh Brolin still actually has his left arm, as he'd have no reason to move it like that otherwise. Now, my point here is, because they were dealing with an actual physical prop during that scene, and one that was actually made out of steel no less, it ends up moving a lot more how you would expect it to, which majorly helps its intimidation factor. Because its movements aren't human, and because the way it's moving reflects that on a very subtle level that helps make it all the scarier because it makes it more believable that it actually exists. And of course, the fact that it is physically there in the first place and not superimposed in after the fact also helps this along as well. But in this shot, because it's making human movements it really shouldn't be able to, that assures you on a subconscious level that what you're seeing isn't actually real and that it's only a man's hand just made to look like a robot's. And listen, I'm not trying to bash the animators who made these scenes or I'm saying that CGI is the most horrible creation ever. I'm just trying to show how, in some ways, practical effects do have advantages over CGI. Because when dealing with a physical prop, it helps make it feel more real and it does tend to be much more in line with how you'd expect it to act. In CGI, everything is too controlled, and the fact that every single particle of a shot has to be animated, it basically makes that unexpected and organic feeling non existent. And those were only just two examples of that. I could easily pull up 10 other clips demonstrating this very problem, but I think I've already made my point quite clear. And of course, there is also the fact that CGI has an extremely hard time looking realistic alongside real actors and props, which is something that practical effects almost never have to worry about. But let's not even go down that road. Alright, I think I'm gonna leave it off there. So, what's your opinion on this whole debate? Do you believe that in many ways practical effects might actually be better than CGI, with the two clips I just showed accurately demonstrating that? Or do you still believe that CGI is the superior method? Please let me know in the comments below. And as always, you don't have to agree with my opinions. You are just as free to have your own thoughts on CGI and practical effects as I am or anybody else. And thank you all for watching. I very much appreciate it. And I hope to see you all next time.